Thank you for being here today. I'm Eric Mills, Allison's dad. It's a hard day, isn't it? But I promise you, you're going to feel a lot better in a few minutes. A lot of what I'm about to say is supposed to be funny. So if you hear something that you think is funny, do me a big favor and please laugh. I put a lot of time into trying to make this lighthearted and funny, so it's okay to laugh. Anyway, several years ago, a close friend of mine lost his young son to a brain tumor. I attended his son's memorial service in Texas, an uplifting tribute to a funny boy with tons of personality. I remember being overwhelmed by the unspeakable injustice of a young child's life being cut short by a terrible disease. Knowing my son's friend was in heaven with his creator was not very comforting to me as an observer, though it obviously was to his parents. I recall being simultaneously grief-stricken for my friend and grateful it was not me on the stage that day. I knew there was no way I could deliver that address, let alone do it exuding peace and joy. I was devastated for my friend and thankful to not be in his shoes. Life can be unfair like that sometimes. You might think I'm up here today because our precious daughter, Allison Phoebe, Allie Bally, as I like to call her, passed away on December 2nd. In a literal sense, you'd be correct. But I'm really speaking to you today for two other reasons. First, Allison loved a good story almost as much as her Uncle Scott enjoys telling them. And second, Allison had a quirky sense of humor. Allison loved to laugh. She loved stories, and the more painful, the better. Every night at dinner, Allison begged me to tell a story, and I did my best to oblige, even when I thought I had no more stories to tell, and no energy with which to tell one. I told stories from Allison's childhood, and her brother's childhood, and my day at work, and the interesting people and situations I encountered. But the stories she wanted to hear the most were stories about when I was bad as a child, or when something bad happened to me, and I can assure you there are some doozies, like the tragic pancake syndrome, or when I recently went to the incorrect hospital room and paid a lovely visit to a complete stranger named Virginia, instead of our dear across the street neighbor, Virginia. Allison loved to watch Seinfeld reruns with me. The same reason Cindy tired of Seinfeld long ago is the reason Allison and I craved it. Every episode is replete with awkward, painful situations. Her favorite character was Kramer. For these two reasons, Allison's passion for stories and quirky sense of humor, I must now provide these remarks today. For the last several months of her life, Allison insisted I tell stories at her funeral. I told her I really didn't want to, but she was adamant. So my adorable daughter screwed me, leaving me no choice but to suck it up and honor her wishes. After all, if she could face cancer and all of its hellish consequences with such courage, far be it from me to take the easy way out. As Allison was fond of saying whenever I would complain about something, the struggle is real. As well as you thought you knew her, I assure there's a lot you didn't know. I'm titling these remarks, The Allison You Might Not Have Known. Allison's middle name, Phoebe, was my idea, after Phoebe Caulfield from one of my favorite books, The Catcher in the Rye. According to Phoebe Caulfield's older brother, the book's protagonist, his sister is not only the smartest kid ever, but also the best dancer ever, and the most sympathetic listener ever, and the funniest little sister ever. That's who I dreamed of having for a daughter, and that's definitely who Allison Phoebe Mills was. Allison's mother is sweet, kind, and caring through and through. I, however, have two opposing personalities. The careful, conservative rule follower that was an engineer in my first career and now serves as an FBI agent, and the adventurous, no-regrets risk-taker, with whom those who have known me a long time have also become familiar. Allison was born with a heavy dose of my I don't care what people think of me attitude in her. One of the first signs we had our hands full with Allison occurred when she was a year old. Our family was gathered around the dining room table for dinner, with Allison directly across from me in her high chair. Suddenly, without warning or provocation, Allison pointed directly at me, smiled a wry smile, and let out a loud hiss like this. Tss. Cindy and I looked at each other like, did you see that? What was that? She never did it again. Allison went through a pretty intense princess phase early in life. I was always proud to push my cart through the aisles of Home Depot with Allison strapped in a princess dress and all the accessories, receiving approving looks from other fathers who'd been there before. Allison had no fear, even when she should have. She was my go-to roller coaster ride partner. She was a climber from an early age, escaping the confines of her crib earlier than her more cautious brother. Allison soon climbed everything that could be climbed. She liked me to recount the time I had a ladder out in the driveway, leaned up against the garage to get on the roof. Allison was outside with me playing. I went inside for 1 second to get something, and when I returned, she was halfway up the ladder headed toward the roof. She could no longer be left unattended. And Allison loved climbing trees, but not just the normal amount kids climb. She would go way, way up the tree, like 2/3 of the way to the top. It was insane and really scary, but she was unfazed and always had a plan to get down. For 2 years, we lived in Arlington, Virginia, immediately across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. In our condo, we had a skinny window ledge that ran along the outside of 2 bedrooms and the den. Cindy was shocked one morning to see Allison outside on the ledge, having departed through her bedroom window. We were only on the 3rd floor, but I assure you, Allison did not know that or take the potential fall into account. She just didn't care. She wanted to go out on the ledge and visit the squirrels. One of the things on Allison's bucket list was skydiving. This past June, we had the opportunity to make that wish come true. You can tell she had a good time, as did her brother and I, who also jumped that afternoon. Allison was also not afraid of a little self-mutilation. She once shaved off most of her right eyebrow, and it never fully grew back. And then there was the time she had one legitimately loose tooth that was ready to come out, and right after it did, she pried out 2 more, which were not ready, to earn some extra money from the tooth fairy. Many of you have gotten to know our Boston Terrier, Ruby. When we decided to get a dog 4 years ago, we put Allison in charge of researching different rescue organizations and finding the right fit for our family. She worked on the project diligently for weeks until she found Ruby. While Allison loved playing with Ruby or cuddling next to her, she also liked to torture the poor dog. When Ruby would find an inviting patch of sun in which to lay down for a nap, Allison liked to stand between her and the window, casting a shadow on Ruby, stealing her sun, as she liked to call it. When an aggravated Ruby would then get up to seek a new sunny spot, Allison would let her settle in and then steal that sun too. Allison would also tickle the little hairs between the pads of Ruby's feet while she slept, causing her to kick violently. We only had Ruby a short time before Allison discovered she was secretly plotting world domination behind our backs, using the phone and computer while nobody was home. Her mother and brother did not believe her, but I did. While we were living in Virginia, we enrolled Allison in a Taekwondo class offered at a local rec center. Allison was a hard worker and fast learner, and as a result, advanced quickly in the short time we were there. When we returned to St. Louis, we found the most wonderful dojon, which offered the same nurturing environment Allison experienced in DC. I soon joined Allison, accompanying her to classes several times a week in order to continue what I myself had started in high school, but more importantly, to share something special with my daughter. Allison was always several promotions ahead of me, which I liked. Though there were many areas in life in which Allison was skilled beyond what I could ever hope to be, it was important to me that we had a common interest in which she was not only ranked above me, but was frankly far more talented. Allison earned her 2nd degree black belt this past May and was looking forward to continuing to 3rd Dan. One of the 5 tenets of Taekwondo is perseverance. To me, Allison defined perseverance. After surgery, Allison lost the use of the right side of her body and most of her short-term memory. She couldn't talk, eat, walk, read, or remember much of anything. She had to relearn all of that and did so through hundreds of hours of therapy provided by the amazing specialist at Children's. When her physical limitations were mostly overcome, Allison next had to relearn how to do school. Again, with the help of dedicated teachers and tutors and a tireless neighbor who loved math more than Allison hated it, she was able to pass 8th grade and her freshman year at Afton High School. She never complained, she persevered. Allison loved food, particularly snacks and desserts. But she was health conscious and thin as a rail. At the age of 6 or 7, Allison proclaimed herself a vegetarian, born mainly of her sympathy for cute cows and pigs. She was not as concerned about chickens and turkeys, but tried to avoid eating them as well. Allison did make occasional exceptions. She liked orange chicken from Panda Express and shrimp in most every form. Allison's favorite food was Mexican, and she loved going with the family to El Maguey, where she would order queso and her favorite entree, vegetarian dinner number 5. When Allison announced she was a vegetarian, we were supportive, but made it clear we were not going to cater to her. As with Cameron, she could eat what her mother had prepared for dinner, picking out the meat if she wished. The alternative for either child was to sit there quietly while the rest of us ate and just go hungry until morning. One night when we were having fish, which none of us cares for, and I'm not sure why Cindy made it in the first place, Allison opted to pass and was appropriately punished. Cindy later overheard Allison telling Cameron upstairs in their rooms that her decision was totally worth it. In 7th and 8th grades, Allison started doing some of her own cooking. She made smoothies in the morning before school and usually made extra for me. She made fried rice and would sometimes cook scrambled eggs for her daddy on the weekend. She was not keen on cleaning up. I have missed hearing that blender in the morning. Allison loved jokes and pranks. Something both kids and I used to do to each other was hide laminated pictures of the Geico Gecko or Monty Python characters in each other's things to be discovered at school or work. When Allison and Cameron had their backpacks laid out to take to school the next day, I would hide these pictures in their books and folders to be discovered as the week went on. Allison loved hearing about pranks I pulled when I was her age, and I'm sure she was conjuring up some to try herself. One of her favorites was when I would wrap a rubber band around the kitchen sink hose nozzle when at a friend's house, causing the next unsuspecting sink user to be drenched. Allison also thought it was hilarious that I once covered my mom's toilet with saran wrap and then lowered the seat so she could not tell until it was too late. In addition to hearing funny stories, Allison loved to participate in a good prank. Last winter, during a big snowstorm, a plow pushed a huge chunk of ice off into our yard. I monitored the iceberg for days, long after the rest of the snow had melted, incredulous that it never seemed to get any smaller. I eventually realized the ice chunk was not ice at all, but rather a massive rock the plow must have scraped out of someone's yard a mile away and ultimately deposited in ours. The rock was so huge and heavy, it took the whole family to tumble it onto a piece of plywood and drag it down the driveway where it could be stored until I figured out what to do with it. One day it dawned on the kids and me that it would be funny to leave our large rock in someone else's yard for them to deal with. Once we chose the right family, we had to wait weeks for them to leave town, giving us the opportunity to deliver the package in the dark of night. Unfortunately, by the time we finally had our shot, Allison was no longer physically able to go with Cameron and me and another co-conspirator late on a Friday night to deliver the rock. But she loved helping plan the scheme and hearing about its execution the next day. This was the kind of adventure Allison loved. She wanted to do the crazy things her dad did in college and about which she longed to hear over and over. Jumping a coal train and riding it through the Texas countryside at night, exploring the steam tunnels under Baylor's campus, gift wrapping a frozen cat, and leaving it on our neighbor's doorstep at Christmas, and getting myself arrested for a college prank gone very wrong. But I had to explain to Allison and Cameron that while it was possible to get away with things like that in the 80s, the world is a different place now, and you could get into a lot of trouble. Instead of forbidding her to seek her own adventures, I asked Allison to run ideas by me first, so I could offer advice on implementation and filter out the really dangerous plans. She appreciated having that kind of relationship with her daddy. Easily Allison's favorite story of all time involved her mother slugging me and giving me an outrageously fat lip while visiting her sister and brother-in-law in Atlanta. Every time we visited, Allison asked Uncle Scott to tell that one, and he never disappointed, my lip growing fatter with each telling. Allison looked up to her older brother, Cameron. They didn't share every interest or passion, but they did enjoy each other's company. While they were young, they used to play a rough, compact version of tackle football in the living room. Allison never complained about rough play. And Allison liked much of Cameron's taste in clothing. She loved inheriting his hand-me-down high tops and t-shirts, although she although she didn't really care much about sports, Allison liked wearing Cameron's outgrown Cardinals and Blues and Redskins gear. Although she tortured Ruby, Allison loved all living creatures and was not afraid of any. If I found a spider or bug in the house and called for help, because I hate bugs, Allison was right there to scoop it up and release it into the wild. She would pick up anything: spiders, frogs, snakes, she loved them all. Allison forbade me to kill the squirrels who destroy my garden. Even when she was stung trying to free a wasp from her tent during a recent Girl Scouts campout, Allison was not regretful. Allison was a warm weather person and preferred being outside to inside. She liked to explore a small wooded corner of our backyard when she was little, and she and Cameron used our metal detector to excavate buried treasures all over our property. Allison buried a 5-gallon bucket to create her own backyard pond and stocked it with minnows and clams and frogs and plants. Allison loved to go with one of my coworkers to her cabin in Illinois for special girls' weekends away. When we visit my parents in Oklahoma, Allison enjoyed going to our ranch, where we rode ATVs and fished. Being a daredevil, she liked to go as fast as I was willing to ride, and I eagerly obliged, soaking up her delighted squeals and laughter. Allison was a patient and focused fisherwoman, routinely catching more fish than her brother and me on our trips to the ranch. And Allison eagerly anticipated her Girl Scouts camping trips and trading swaps with her friends. Both kids looked forward to the annual camping trips we took with my work friends and their kids every fall. Allison particularly liked to catch crawdads in the stream near our favorite campsite. Her favorite camping delicacy was what we called egg in an orange, which consists of an orange cut in half and scooped out with an egg poured into it, reassembled, wrapped in foil, and laid in the coals. After 10 or 15 minutes, it was a delicious orange-flavored treat. Allison also going geocaching as a family, especially when it took us deep into the woods where she could explore. Allison loved God and country. She was a patriot, but not political. She found political discussions boring and pointless. Allison was proud to be an American. Among her many aspirations was to serve her country in the United States Navy or Air Force. Allison also sometimes talked of going to law school and becoming a federal prosecutor, or pursuing a career in marine biology and living in Florida where it was warm year-round. Allison was proud her daddy worked for the FBI and loved hearing stories about my cases, wondering how people thought they were going to get away with the things they did. Allison was highly amused when, on any given winter night before an early morning operation, I would bring my body armor and guns into the house to warm up so they would not be like ice cubes at 6 a.m. She often wondered if she had any other friends who considered that a normal routine part of their home lives. Allison was particularly delighted when I would choose to wear what she referred to as my butt holster, admonishing me, "Don't do any backflips today, Dad." That has special meaning for FBI agents out there in the audience. Allison was a voracious reader and excellent creative writer. She loved to read Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side aloud to anyone who would listen and laugh along with her. She read so much that it became a problem on family trips, at least in my mind. She didn't care about seeing the countryside and was content to just read or nap until we arrived wherever we were going. I used to have to demand that she put down her book and look out the window as we passed through a new city or the mountains or came upon a nice view. I could not believe those words were coming out of my mouth, "Put down your book and look out the window," of all the perceived problems to have with a child. When Allison was hospitalized for nearly a month after having surgery, I helped fill the time and get her brain functioning again by reading her another of my favorite books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That kind of creative, nonsensical humor was right up her alley. Long after returning home from the hospital, that was one of her favorite memories, and we continued to read other Douglas Adams books in the series. When she was young, Allison loved watching old Pink Panther cartoons with her dad and brother before bed. As she got older, she liked to watch Police Squad, the short-lived Leslie Nielsen prequel to the Naked Gun series. Later, Allison enjoyed watching Gator Boys and Impractical Jokers and The Carbonaro Effect. Allison would spend hours watching Fail Army on YouTube and finding hilarious nailed it pictures of Pinterest fails. Allison watched episodes of Bizarre Foods with me. Though she would never in a million years eat any of those things, she did find the show fascinating. And Cindy could count on Allison to watch Disney movies and older chick flicks with her, cuddled on the sofa with a bowl of popcorn, a blanket, and Ruby. But Allison also shared my love of the true classics, the Blues Brothers, Ghostbusters, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. She liked to clomp around the house making the coconut sound. Allison looked forward to taking rides in my Ford Bronco. She often asked me to pick her up from school in the Bronco so her friends could see her climb into the huge truck. It made me happy to see her beaming with joy as I rumbled into the parking lot. Allison looked forward to buying a green or blue Jeep someday. Allison used to head out the door to go to school every morning with what seemed like way too much stuff. Her backpack slung over one shoulder and another satchel kind of thing on the other. I would always ask her if she would like for me to perhaps get a suitcase or another backpack so she could take those too, and she would just roll her eyes at me. In middle school, Allison had an unusual dress policy. She was committed to wearing Nike running shorts to school every day in the fall until the first snow. Sometimes that first snowfall did not occur for a while, maybe until January. But she did not alter her policy. She was a free spirit, but also a rule follower. Even she was not above the policy. Allison liked school, not so much the academic part, but rather being with friends and teachers. Before her diagnosis and surgery, Allison's grades were insanely good. I used to implore Allison to not put so much pressure on herself and reminded her that some B's were acceptable as long as she was trying her hardest. If you spent any time with Allison at all in the last 2 years, she no doubt informed you she did not like math, particularly algebra. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't the teachers, but the subject matter. She was horrified by my love of the very things she hated and found so pointless, word problems. Allison was super silly. Several years ago, she started to make up little song and dance routines about my attire. Her first was called Fishbone Underpants. If she caught me wearing my boxer shorts with fish skeletons on them, she would spring into action with her song.
Fishbone underpants, 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 yeah!
Yeah.
Allison had a similar routine she called Boston Boxers, which she unveiled when I purchased some boxer shorts with Boston Terriers on them.
Boston Boxers, 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 yeah! Didn't we already do?
She had yet another song and dance about an FBI agent who made the news a few years ago, but I'm not showing that one today. Most people are already familiar with Allison's artistic ability. Allison had an amazing talent for making something incredible out of nothing, like scraps of household materials and garage stuff. She made me a spectacular Hasty Bake grill replica out of 2 Tic Tac containers, complete with a hood that raises and lowers, wheels that turn, bacon and eggs on the grill surface, and an internal storage compartment. It is one of my treasures. Allison got many of her crafting ideas from Pinterest, her favorite website. There was nothing Allison could not create if she set her mind to it. Our whole extended family loves to play games. Allison preferred board games or table games to card games. Her favorites included Rummikub, Flux, and Apples to Apples. Allison enjoyed playing poker during our periodic family fun nights, when we would set up a game table and enjoy root beer floats while we played. And although card games were not her first choice, she was becoming quite adept at hearts. This summer, when our family was focused on enjoying our remaining time with Allison to the fullest, we played a lot of Rummikub. For someone who really didn't care for numbers, Allison was very good at finding numerical patterns and sequences. While she was still feeling pretty good, Allison would begin every morning, early, sitting at the dining room table, practicing Rummikub by herself until we got up. What I wouldn't give to hear the clicking of those tiles on that table now. Allison was a collector and surprisingly organizer of junk like me. She had 2 fishing tackle boxes filled with odds and ends she kept on hand for her projects. Things like erasers, soda can tabs, rubber bands, rocks, and smashed pennies. She invented a game she liked to play in the car on road trips, the tackle box game. The game could be played 2 ways. One, where you would dream up something, like a plastic frog, and she would have to find it in her collection. And the other way to play the game was to select something out of a tackle box and hand it to her, and she, with her eyes closed, would guess what it was. She always got that right, no matter how obscure the object. She knew the contents of her tackle boxes. Allison wanted to be as tall as her cousin Ashlyn, who she absolutely adored and emulated in many ways. This past spring, Allison finally grew to be taller than her mother and was tremendously happy to point that out every chance she got. Allison was athletic, but team sports did not interest her. That is why she loved and excelled at Taekwondo, and also why she enjoyed cross country. Allison was not competitive. She just liked the exercise and social interaction. She loved to run, alone or with others. She enjoyed cross country in middle school and looked forward to running for Coach Walker in high school. That was one of the areas in which Allison aspired to be like Cameron, running cross country. I used to love to go to her meets and cheer her on, but always had to give her a hard time later, telling her she could have recorded much better times if she'd not been chatting with her friends the whole race. She really didn't care about winning. She just enjoyed the journey. Allison took a lot of pride in her strength and flexibility. She was one of the strongest, fittest kids, let alone girls, you could exercise with. Her push-up form was excellent. Arms shoulder-width apart, rigid back, touching her nose to the floor. Allison could do sit-ups forever, and she was very proud of her bent arm hang, coming within mere seconds of setting the Rogers Middle School record for 7th grade girls. She never let herself live that down. Allison was a troublemaker, perhaps my protege in that area too. She loved to flop on the bed when her mother was nearly done making it. Allison would run to the car to steal the front heated seat before her mother could get there. And when we were living in DC, Allison and I invented this awesome game we called Dead Legs, which quite simply consisted of my picking her up and chasing her brother and mother around the condo, me swinging Allison from side to side, causing her limp legs to thrash wildly and strike our terrified victims. Cindy grew to hate that terrifying game. It really is unsettling to be chased around like that with no notice and for no reason. Allison developed a signal for when it was time to strike. She would take my hand and give it a series of firm squeezes, at which point I would pick her up and begin to stalk our unsuspecting victim. In addition to physically torturing our dog Ruby, Allison messed with her emotions. On Mother's Day, Allison liked to innocently ask Ruby if she'd seen her puppies recently. She also would ask Ruby where the rest of her tail was. Among Allison's favorite troublemaker stories were when I would dare my brothers, Kevin and Colby, to do some task in exchange for $2. Two of her favorites involved Kevin going to retrieve the mail in his underwear and Colby dancing silently 2 times around a table of strangers in a Mexican restaurant. Be sure to talk to them at the reception later. Allison loved her grandparents, spending time doing different special things with each. Allison played dominoes and Rummy Cube and enjoyed visiting Stone Mountain with the Parker grandparents. And when in Tulsa, she loved riding the tractor with my father at our ranch and cooking and sewing and working on crafts with my mother. Allison was a no shoes, play in the mud, get dirty, peace, love, and happiness free spirit. She lived life to its fullest. She sported a blue streak in her hair, which, to her surprise, I, her cool dad, enthusiastically encouraged. I took her to get her ears pierced, and she looked forward to getting 3 cartilage piercings in each ear when she turned 16. Unfortunately, she was not able to fulfill that wish because she could not have any metal in her body due to her frequent MRIs. Allison looked forward to having a tattoo like her dad. I was on board, but I told her I wanted to approve her idea first. Allison wanted to spend a semester living in Indonesia with her Aunt Kim and Uncle Kevin and cousins, attending the high school where they serve as missionaries. While we were living in Virginia, Allison informed her mother and me that we were ruining her life. Funny enough, after returning to St. Louis, she longed to be back in DC. For a free spirit, Allison was surprisingly thrifty. She liked to earn money and watch her bank account balance grow. She was looking forward to funding her own Roth IRA when she turned 18, like her brother. Good hygiene was important in theory to Allison. But she didn't care much for showering or cleaning her room. She considered it her job to police bathroom use, always quick to ask if you had washed your hands. This past summer, as Allison's condition was starting to worsen and her language was becoming more raw and unfiltered, she had a very interesting retort when I told her I was careful to not pee on my hands in the bathroom. Her words are not appropriate for the stage today, but were the funniest thing I ever heard her say. For all her antics, Allison was truly the perfect child. She used to remind us of that, referring to the years before her birth as the Dark Ages. The only routine problem we had with her, if it could be called a problem, was her insistence on leaving half-filled glasses of water sitting all over the house. That kind of thing drives me absolutely crazy. But that was one reason Allison was exactly what I needed in a daughter, someone to remind me not to take myself and life so seriously. Before Allison's surgery, she was a 14-year-old girl who had physically outgrown her last daddy's girl shirt and was starting to outgrow it metaphorically too. Instead of laughing uncontrollably when I would wrestle her to the floor to blow in her stomach, she would scream, "Get away from me, you freak!" And she was stronger now and punched really hard, making horseplay even more challenging. Allison emerged from surgery even sweeter and kinder than she had been before. She was so very appreciative, constantly thanking everyone for everything. She would once again hold my hand on trips to the hardware store. She would snuggle in bed, even if I was not wearing the requisite pajamas over my Boston boxers. Ignorance was bliss, and it was wonderful. I want to close today by speaking directly to Allison's closest friends. Mostly girls, but also one boy. You all know who you are. Thank you for being loyal friends to Allison these past 2 years. Thank you for looking after her at school, aware that she might not be able to find her classroom, or probably needed help carrying her stuff. Thank you for encouraging Allison to come to youth group and watching over her there. Thank you for staying in touch with her and for so many visits to our house. It was probably hard and scary for you. Allison was changing from the sharp-witted, funny, energetic girl you always knew into a different person, both in personality and appearance. It would have been easy to not come visit, and we would have understood. But you insisted on coming over to play games with her, laugh with her, distract her, and cheer her up. And when she could no longer play games or laugh, you just sat with her. You demonstrated loyalty and courage and character like I've never seen. As parents and as a family, we crammed a lot of experiences into Allison's 16 years here on this earth. There are so many places I still wanted to take her, things I still wanted to do with her, teach her, and learn from her. Like how in the world to empty the overflowing barn and grain silos on hay day, which I must now figure out how to do on my own. This summer, I took the opportunity to confess to Allison what I saw as my fathering shortcomings, and she assured me that she really didn't notice and really didn't care, but forgave me anyway if it made me feel better, and it did. When it became clear that Allison would be preceding me to heaven, I made her promise me she would be waiting for me one day with a big hug and kiss. I'm really looking forward to that day. I sure miss my little girl. So long, and thanks for all the fish. And now, at Allison's insistence, I must leave you with this.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cindy, and I have the privilege of being Allison's mom. Allison went to be with Jesus nearly 2 years to the day of her diagnosis, and those 2 years have been quite a journey. Shortly after Allison's diagnosis, I made the conscious choice to approach the future with gratitude. I knew I'd rather have however many years Allison lived than none at all. So I tried to realize I wasn't owed anything and that every day with Allison was a gift, and it was. Allison brought spark to our lives. She was fun-loving and carefree and helped keep Eric, Cameron, and me from taking ourselves too seriously. I marveled at her creativity. It seemed she could make something out of nothing. For a school project in 4th grade, using her trusty glue gun, Allison made a miniature replica of a printing press out of toothpicks and a cereal box. When she showed it to me, I thought, that does look like a printing press. And then I thought, I could never have made that in a million years. But that's the way she was. She'd get an idea in her head or see something on Pinterest, and she'd be off and running, and she did it completely by herself. Allison loved nature, and her creativity would spill into that as well. One summer, we went to visit my parents at their new home in Atlanta. There was a small wooded area behind the backyard, and Allison spent the majority of her time there, building a teepee-like structure out of sticks and then playing in it. She didn't use any tools, but my dad told me it lasted for months until one day the wind finally knocked it down. Allison was active and loved to hike. She especially liked exploring off the beaten path and playing in streams. When it was just the two of us, Allison would lead and give me a sly look before veering off into the woods and leaving the path behind. I'm going to miss our hikes together. But one of the things I'm going to miss most about Allison is her sweet spirit. She was sweet and grateful before her surgery 2 years ago, but the surgery made her even more so. She said thank you all the time. She thanked her teachers, her doctors, and her nurses. She even thanked the phlebotomist when he drew her blood, even though she hated blood draws. So now I'd like to follow Allison's example and take a few moments to say my own thanks on behalf of our family. First of all, I'd like to thank every person in the medical community who served us and Allison. Allison's treatment at Children's Hospital was top-notch, and her doctors, nurses, therapists, and everyone in between did an amazing job caring for us. I also want to thank Allison's teachers, tutors, and school administrators. They met Allison where she was and helped her be successful in school in spite of her new challenges. They cared about Allison much more than they cared about her academics. And finally, thank you to the hundreds of people who had no professional connection to Allison, but supported us in so many ways. Thank you for the prayers, hugs, cards, meals, gifts, visits, and messages. Thank you to the people who came and cleaned our house, the man who mowed our lawn all summer by himself without even asking, and all those making this service and the reception that follows possible. We've been overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity of so many people, several of whom we'd never met. It's been heartwarming and truly remarkable. Allison's life was way shorter than I wanted it to be, but it was beautiful and it was good. I can't explain why God didn't heal Allison, even though so many of us prayed he would. But I know that God didn't give Allison cancer, and I know that now she's in heaven and she's cancer-free. I'm genuinely happy for her, but heartbroken for the rest of us. But before any of you get mad at God because Allison's gone, I want you to remember that God gave us Allison in the first place, and that was a gift. And Allison is in heaven, not because she was a good person or did good things, but because God sacrificed his own son, Jesus, so Allison could be there, and she believed that. I still have an awful lot to be grateful for. And even though Allison called the time before she was born the dark ages, I know she'd want me to keep living and enjoying my life. But boy, will I be happy when it's my time to go to heaven and I get to see her